Hey everyone, I'm Emma, and today we're talking about something I didn't expect to land in an AI conversation at all: printing. It feels like one of those industries where everything's already figured out. You send something, it gets printed. Done. But clearly that's not the full story, so I figured I'd bring Sanjeev back in, CEO at Biz4Group, to help break this down. Sanjeev, good to have you with us.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, printing looks simple until you actually sit inside how it runs.
Yeah, that's where I'm stuck. What am I missing? Because right now it just feels like machines doing their thing.
That's the visible part. The messy part is everything before that. Even a basic job, say brochures, you're figuring out how much material you'll need, which machine to use, when to run it, how it fits with everything else in line. And none of those decisions are isolated. You tweak one thing, it affects something else.
So it's more like constant coordination than a single process.
Exactly. And most of it runs on experience, which works, but it's not always consistent, especially when volume goes up or things change quickly.
Yeah, because every day probably looks a bit different.
It does. Different jobs, different priorities, so people are adjusting as they go, and that's where things start drifting, not in a big, obvious way, just slightly off.
What does that actually look like? Like a real example?
Material usage is a simple one. You're not sure exactly how much paper you'll need, so you add a buffer. Totally fair. You don't want to run out mid-job. But when that happens across a lot of jobs, you're consistently overusing. No one notices because each decision made sense at the time.
So it's not mistakes. It's just small safety decisions stacking up.
Exactly. Same with scheduling. You might line things up in a way that feels convenient, but you end up with machines sitting idle here and there. Nothing dramatic, just inefficient.
All right, so where does AI actually help here?
It starts by noticing patterns you wouldn't catch. It looks at past jobs and sees things like, this type of job didn't need that much buffer, or this sequence slowed things down. So instead of relying only on experience, you start getting a clearer sense of what actually works.
So it's kind of correcting those habits over time.
Yeah, and it keeps adjusting as things move. If something gets delayed or finishes early, it can reshuffle things. That's hard to do manually because you'd have to keep rethinking your plan all day.
Yeah, planning once is doable, keeping it updated constantly is not.
Exactly. And that gap between what you planned and what actually happens, that's where most inefficiencies come from.
And what about errors during printing?
Usually you catch them a bit late, midway or after a batch. With AI, you can catch issues earlier. Not perfectly, but earlier, so you're not wasting as much fixing things later.
Yeah, that alone sounds like it would make a difference. Sanjeev, this was interesting. I didn't expect printing to have this much going on behind it.
Yeah, it's one of those industries where the complexity stays out of sight.
And to everyone listening, if something feels simple from the outside, there's usually a lot more going on underneath. Stick around for the next podcast. We'll be back with more.